such a pleasure to see all of you here and for us to honor this amazing scientist that has come for 3 days to Salem. Jani Ingram is from Flagstaff, Arizona, and giving the first science pub that I think we've had in Salem in quite some time, many years. So this is wonderful to be here for this event, and I love how intimate it is, and I can see all the sparkles in these eyes of how engaged and excited all of you are to be here, so I really appreciate that. And before we, as we begin, I would like to honor these lands of the Kalapuya Nation, and to remind ourselves that they have been the original stewards of these lands for 14,000 years. And more than just 14,000 times that the earth went around the sun, 14,000 years is almost 600 generations of people. But in the last 8 generations, things have changed. And part of the establishment of Salem, and I know so many of us here love Salem. We love it. It is our home. But the establishment of the city also coincides with the complete decimation of many of those peoples and many atrocities a lot of us are aware of, and but maybe not fully aware of. And one of the things I did want to mention is that a lot of us see Salem as Cherry City, right? It has that name. But in some of my investigations, I learned that cherry trees were brought over around 1850. So in terms of this whole timeline, Cherry City, it's really new. And so I would invite you to, when you hear Cherry City, to think about those 600 generations and to think about what you can do to learn more about those 600 generations, and not just of their past, but the present, those that still live here and those that are going to steward us into the future. And just imagine 600 generations from now, and imagine that world where they are making us and all of us happy together, and we can live better together and stewards these precious, precious lands that are here. And I would like to now introduce Dr. Jani Ingram, Northern Arizona University Regents Professor. So Regents Professor is the highest honor that any of the professors can have from the Arizona state system. And there's good reason for that. So she has been doing research that is powerful environmental chemistry research, but that also impacts a lot of the public health issues, especially on native lands, especially on Navajo lands, but that impacts many high-risk populations. And so she has this amazing way of studying environmental chemistry and doing some very precise measurements, but that also powerfully impacts the people. And she also communicates with the people and learns what they want and what can help them, and works with them. Not only that, she has mentored over 100 students, and many of them are from many of the groups that are not very well represented at all in STEM fields. And so she mentors them and she inspires them and is really impacting the world in that way. And in fact, the American Chemical Society in 2018 invited her out to New Orleans and gave her an award for her work in that realm. And she has published numerous publications. She has many, many grants from national granting agencies, and is a lovely person. So with that, here is Dr. Jani Ingram.
Yeah, thank you. That's very amazing way to start this. So yate, she Jani Ingram Yunishe, Naanes Deji Tachini Nishle, Bilagana Bashichin, Kilachini Bashiche, Bilagana Dashishnali. So that is my introduction in Dene, or the Navajo language. I'd like to say it's my traditional or my first language. That is a lie. I'm an English speaker, but I have learned to introduce myself, and I'll talk a little bit about that, just to give you a little bit of where I'm coming from. So I think I have to get the changer thing. Yeah. So I chose this topic when Karen talked to me about doing more of a public discussion. So I gave a seminar yesterday about a lot of my work, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But I thought, gosh, what would be interesting? And it turns out that Tuesday, February 7th, is National Periodic Table Day. And I'm sure many of you already were, planning a celebration, and so I thought, well, that's good. And then a lot of the work that we do is looking at elemental different analyses. And so I thought, well, I can draw from some of the work that my students have done. And then lastly, this really came about from a hike that I was taking with one of my husband's cousins. And we were talking about, I think about calcium and calcium intake and this kind of thing. And I said, well, think about the periodic table. And she says to me, Jani, I have never thought about the periodic table. And I thought, what? Wait, don't we all think about it? So I thought that would be a decent topic for this public discussion. So this is actually a picture of my downtown restroom or bathroom, or downstairs bathroom, or guest bathroom, because I do hold the periodic table near and dear to my heart. So before I get started, I just wanted to greet you from where I'm from, which is Flagstaff, Arizona. And we are at the base of these beautiful sacred peaks that you see in the background. And those peaks are sacred to many of the tribes in northern Arizona, including my tribe, the Dene. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that. And then I wanted to give you a little bit of my background, just where am I coming from. So this is a picture of, let's see if I can, yep. So this is my mom and this is my grandmother. And they really have given me lots of strength, besides my white grandmother as well. And then these are my parents. So my mom is a member of the Dene, or the Navajo tribe. And in Navajo, you see there's a connection to people through the clan system. So that's why I introduced myself with my different clans, so that perhaps I have some relatives here. So these are my mom's clans. And in English, your main clan is through your mother, so it's a very maternal society. So the charcoal streak, so almost like a football player you think about, whereas my grandfather was Red House clan. And then my dad is clearly what in Navajo we would say a Bilagana. He's a white guy. And so he was born and raised at the south rim of the Grand Canyon, which is not where many people were raised. He grew up in the barns working with the horses and the mules. He really did want to be a cowboy. He ended up being a math teacher. But I tell people that I am the product of a cowboy and an Indian. So that is my background. And then besides being this professor person, I am a proud mother of 3 children. So shown in this picture is my husband, James, and my kids, Jordan, Joshua, and Jaleesa. And if you look closely, they're pretty biodiverse. So they do have the same mother and father. My middle child somehow got all the Navajo blood. My daughter is blonde and blue-eyed. And then my oldest son looks more like his dad. And the only thing they really have in common is they are humongous. So my husband's 6'6", and they go 6'6", 6'5", 6'4", 6'3", and then me. So we always said we were growing a bigger America. So And I came from this small town in Kingman, which is, if you've been on Interstate 40 going west toward Las Vegas, it's where you turn off to get off 40 to go to Vegas. And I thought I was going to be a bank teller because I was pretty good at math, and that seemed like a decent job. But then as I got better at math, people said, oh, you should be an engineer. So I had no idea what that meant, but I was like, okay, this will be an engineer. But I was also a jock. So I played every and any sport. I had two brothers growing up. So I played in high school. I played volleyball, basketball, and I ran track. But my main sport was basketball. And I wasn't amazing, but I was good enough to get a scholarship to go to community college. So I went to community college. And back then, they would recruit half a basketball team and half a volleyball team and expect those girls to play both sports because then you didn't have to have as many scholarships. They didn't tell me that before I went. So I got to campus and they were talking about volleyball practice and I was like, well, I don't care. I'm a basketball player. And by the end of that first week, I was like, I think I'm supposed to play volleyball. And so I went home at Labor Day, told my parents, and sure enough, I played both of those sports at the same time. And so we would practice basketball at 6 in the morning, go to class, do volleyball, and vice versa during basketball season. So I got really good at time management. So it was tough, but it was good. It was in community college, though, that I really started to believe I could do something different than bank telling. And so I had an awesome chemistry teacher that I actually took all my chemistry classes, so 4 different lectures, 4 different labs. He was a Biligana, white guy, but he was married to a Navajo woman, and I felt like he actually knew me. He understood me, and he was awesome. And he helped me work through all the practices and getting the labs in. So it was really there that I think that's where I decided I wanted to go into chemistry. So I also met my husband. He's also a basketball player. And he was from Las Cruces. So I followed him to New Mexico State University, where I got a degree in chemistry. And also got the opportunity to do undergraduate research both at New Mexico State and at a Department of Energy lab in Los Alamos. And I was telling students earlier at Willamette that most of the time at Los Alamos, you had to be either related to or have a connection to the lab in order to get like an undergraduate internship there. I had none of that. But I got this job, and I figured it was because I was Navajo, because I was Native American. And later, at some time this summer, the manager said, oh no, because my name's Jani, weird name, male, female, we don't know. You know, my last name was Cunningham at that time. Anyway, he assumed I was, and I was in chemical engineering at that point, that I was just a white kid that, you know, had a pretty good resume. So sadly, but I was like, he thought I was a white guy. This is great. I'm not a token. I actually did this on my own merit, which is quite sad to be excited for that part, but it was really exciting. So I was like, I felt like that was a good thing to say, you know, you maybe you're okay at this stuff. So from New Mexico State, I went to the University of Arizona. I worked for the only woman in our department, the chemistry department. Partly because of that, I was like, I am not going into academics. It's rough. It's a rough row to hoe. So, and I had worked at the government lab, so I ended up going to the Idaho National Laboratory in Idaho Falls, Idaho, where I worked for 12 years with an awesome group of people. I learned a lot. But it turns out I did want to work with students. I did want to do that part of sort of the training and that kind of stuff. And so in 2002, I was able to kind of go home. Flagstaff isn't where I was from, but it's only about 150 miles. My mom and dad met in Flagstaff at NAU. So I was able to get a job there, and it's been awesome. I really, really enjoy working with the students and working with the communities that surround Flagstaff. So But tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the periodic table and how it might impact you and how you can consider it in your day-to-day life. So you probably, hopefully recognize it over here, right? And so I'll talk a little bit about why it's set up the way it is. And then there are different, actually, periodic tables that have these little cartoons that kind of tell you where you might see, say, vanadium or chromium or those types of things. So those are kind of fun. My daughter knows that I'm a wine drinker, so she gave me the periodic table of wine. So there's all kinds of things you can see. So it was a slow thing in developing, all right? So I looked up some history, and in 1789, this Antoine Lavoisier, started to publish this list of 33 elements, okay? And an element being, the atom that's really the building block behind things. In 1805, this John Dalton, who started to look at more elements and, sort of expanding the list. And then in 1829, Wolfgang, and I'm not saying his name, this chemist from Germany, started to really think about the atomic weights and the relationships. But it really is credited that Dmitri Mendeleev is really the father of the periodic table. So his first periodic table is shown there, not quite what we see today, but really thinking about how to categorize, in a sense, those elements so we can better consider them, right? And so this is, if you see the outline of the periodic table, okay, and so we know that the atomic radius or the size of those elements are going to get bigger as we go down, and then they're going to get bigger as we go this way because things kind of expand with the electrons and so forth. We see that the ionization energy, which is related to how well something grabs an electron, kind of goes in this direction, and then same thing with the electron affinity and the ionization energy here. And so it really helps you to say things in the column have a lot of similar properties, right? Things that go along the row maybe, but we do know that these are more the metallic side. These are what we would call metalloids, and these are non-metallic elements. So I know all of you are going to go home, go to Amazon, and get that shower curtain so that you too can look at these on a daily basis. So, and then of course people do all kinds of fun stuff with it, right? And so you've probably seen many ways to write words. The big bummer is there's no J's. 0 J's, and my family is James, Jani, Josh, Jordan, and Jaleesa. So I can't spell our names with the periodic table. This one is the correct use of wine, tungsten, iodide, neon. This one my mom gave me, it's a coaster, and I'm like, Mom, there's no WI, and this neon is the wrong number. And she says to me, no lie, she says, no one's gonna care. And I'm like, so this is actually an extra credit thing on my tests often to say, what is wrong with this picture? So, but anyway, I thought those were kind of fun. And so what I'm gonna talk to you about is elemental analysis. So my background is analytical chemistry, which means I like to make measurements. And I tell people, you cannot push science unless you have an analytical chemist. Because if you ask a question and you can't make the measurement, you still have a question. And so, of course, I'm a little biased, but so I tell students all the time, I'm like, everyone needs to make a measurement. So there are jobs out there for analytical chemists. So in elemental analyses, and I'll talk about different types of samples, but taking a sample in order to get information that's going to tell you something about that type of sample. Most samples cannot go directly into whatever measuring device you have. You have to do some kind of preparation. So that can be easy or that can be crazy. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, I'm going to talk mainly about one instrument that we use to do elemental analysis. It's called inductively coupled plasma mass spec. or ICP-MS for short, and that just means it's able to make these very, very trace elemental analyses. And then once you get your data, you definitely want to process it and understand it. So the steps are pretty straightforward. I would say this one a lot of times is the most difficult, but we've run into some sampling issues as well. So I'm going to talk to you today about 4 different projects within my group that really are based on doing this elemental analysis, so understanding the periodic table. So you see a sheep, you see tattoo. This, if you're not familiar, is called blue corn mush. It's a traditional food of the Navajo. And then this is what some of you might be ingesting right now, is some beer. So we're going to walk through those. So the first one is this beer project. So we in Flagstaff, I think, have 8 or 9 breweries. We're 70,000 people, so there is a lot of them. And so this particular brewery, Mother Road, which has to do with Route 66, decided to try and get on the front end of the fact that beer is not regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. So there is no regulation for what you're drinking. All right. But FDA is starting to look at this. And so Mother Road asked or talked to people at NAU to say, maybe we can develop the right analytical processes or methods in order to be able to start doing those analyses. So that's really where this came from. And this is the work, and I wish I had his picture up there, a student of mine, Jason Farmer, he graduated last spring, and now he's in a PhD program down at the University of Arizona. So why beer? Why is this important? It has become a huge industry, right? It's obviously very popular, but Americans spend $37 billion a year on beer. And so it's just growing and growing. I mean, 8-9 breweries in Flagstaff alone is a lot. It's not regulated, as I said, but the FDA is starting to think about, maybe this is something that we need to start doing. And so that's really was a lot of the motivation for this project. And so one of the things that my student did was he collected beer from as many different sources as he could. So, for example, let me find it here. My daughter was playing volleyball at the University of Alaska Anchorage, so we brought him back Alaskan beer. And so you can kind of see all the different places that we, supplied him beer. And what he did was he just ran essentially the periodic table. So he was looking for any high signal from a specific element for all these different types of beer. And some of the things he found are shown here. These are just, and we didn't quantitate them because that's a lot, but he just wanted to do some, we call them survey scans. So for example, Coors Light had the most uranium. So my lab is really known for doing uranium. So is that the Rocky Mountain water? I don't know. So, but is it crazy high? Again, we didn't quantitate it. The other thing that was interesting was there was some of the beers that were really high in lithium. So if you feel good after a blue moon, perhaps that's why. So, but for the most part, most things were safe, and definitely our partners had safe levels. So that was very encouraging. So this is just kind of showing you here are different elements, right, that he looked at specifically. And again, not just beer, but he tapped into people's liquor closet. So different bourbons, rums, and so forth, and just looking at chromium, magnesium, copper, arsenic, and lead. So arsenic and lead, good news, not very much there. A few of them a little bit higher. So copper was a little bit higher. He tried to color code things when he saw high levels. We were concerned about chromium because of the stainless steel that people use when they're doing the brewing process and so forth. So he told me what this, because this one's kind of frightening. He told me what this was, and I cannot remember now. I'm so sorry. I can't remember what botanical digestive is, but anyway, it's got a lot of chromium. So his work really, for his thesis, was really developing the method, but along the way, he had some fun. So the one thing, if you have your student doing beer work, don't let them throw the beer bottles in the trash in the lab. The janitors alerted our facility manager, and the facility manager came to me, and the first thing the facility manager said was, I thought it was odd though they were all these different beers, whereas if it was a normal college student, it'd just be all Pabst Blue Ribbon or something like that, right? So anyway, that's one of the things we learned. Okay, taking a new project. This was actually one of the first projects in my lab back in the early 2000s. It was looking at tattoo ink. So it started with this student right here, Lindsay Wagner. She, bright as a whip. She was one of my smartest students I ever had, and she was my first one. She got this tattoo. She came into my office, and we were talking about how tattoo inks fade over time and how interesting it would be to try and figure that out. So she started to look for synthetic skin and all these ways we could do this experiment. Well, as she dug into this, again, this is not a regulated industry. The tattoo artists must have clean needles, but they can inject anything they want. And so then we're like, well, we don't even know what the chemistry of these inks are, let alone, how are they going to fade over time? So what we did was to say, okay, that's the first thing. Let's characterize the chemistry of these inks. So just so you know, this is a pretty interesting topic to the whole world. We ended up getting on this countdown with Keith Overman. We were in a lot of different posts. They made the Flagstaff newspaper, so that her buddy in all this is Haley Finley Jones. So just as far as what these girls went on to do, Leslie is actually a lawyer now, and Haley is a PhD chemist. So these were her beginnings. So what we did, and I don't recommend this quite honestly, but I just went online and bought inks. So we bought 3 different manufactured blues, reds, yellows, whites, and then 5 different blacks. Okay, one of the reasons I don't recommend it is then the tattoo industry is constantly giving you emails and they think you're an artist and you're like, oh man. But we wanted to see what differences were. So we purchased these inks, and essentially they did elemental analysis. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of the data here. So it turns out that so you can see the different colors. Here's this 5th ink didn't have any lead at all. So you can see this is the black, this is the white, this is the blue, red, yellow. And the values are all over the place, right? So again, you don't know what the tattoo artist is injecting. Could be this white, could be this white, that type of thing. So this one is lead. So here's silver, and again, there's not a lot in the black. The white, definitely all over the place, as well as the yellow, okay? So copper is a little bit more consistent, and it turns out that pretty much copper inks are phthalocyanine, copper compounds. So those were the only ones that were sort of consistent and even, a bit different, but definitely very, very high levels of copper. And this one, so we wanted to look for mercury. And so disregard this for a moment. You can see super low levels. This is awesome, right? I had a student who was working at the prison in Winslow. And she said, oh, I could get you some ink from the prisoners. I was like, okay. So we ran it, and they ran the mercury, and it was so much bigger. And I was like, run it again. So they ran it a few more times, definitely super tall. So then I start talking to the gal that works in the prison, and she said, well, what they do is they take the fluorescent light bulb, they take the top off of it, they put like hair goop in it, burn it, and use that ash. Well, the way they get the fluorescence is with some mercury. And I was like, oh my gosh. So, public health announcement is if you go to prison, don't get a tattoo there. Okay, so there's my advice for the evening. So really, really interesting stuff. All right, so now we're going to take a new turn, and we're going to look at some food, okay? And specifically food that the Navajo are very interested, or traditional food to the Navajo. So the first one is I'm going to talk a little bit about sheep. So this is the student who's done most of this work. Her name's Andy Lister. She's right now a doctoral student in my lab, and I keep telling her when she gets her degree, I think I'm going to have to retire, because she really has been in the lab long enough that she keeps all the instruments going, trains students. She's amazing. So if you're not familiar, the Navajo Nation is located in the Four Corners area. It's actually not in Colorado, but it's in Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. There's really closer to 350,000 folks that are enrolled members, including myself. About half of them live on the reservation, and the reservation is extremely rural. It's about the land mass of West Virginia. It doesn't look at all like West Virginia. I finally got to go to West Virginia. I was like, we always say West Virginia. This doesn't look like Navajo Nation, but it's about that size. So as many indigenous groups have, they have traditional foods. A lot of them are place-based, so wherever they're located. Here in the Northwest, lots of shellfish and other fish like that. We don't really have fish on Navajo, so our food really is more related to definitely sheep and goats, wild game. I'm going to talk a little bit in a bit about blue corn food, some of the other vegetables type of thing. And then we definitely have the government. So the government gave most tribes flour, lard, salt. So most tribes actually have some form of fry bread, right? But this would be called mutton stew. This is definitely something you would get at many Navajo homes. So the Navajo were introduced to sheep a long time ago in the 1600s. It's really a connection for folks to the land. The more sheep you have, really, the more it symbolized, prosperity type of thing. Typically, the sheep were owned by the women and also produced, sheep herded by the women. It was interesting, back in 1930s, the U.S. government decided that the Navajo were overgrazing, so they wanted to decrease the sheep herds. And what they did was they went to the men and they tried to work this through with the men, and it turned out that it was the women's sheep, and so it was a complete mess. So it's good to understand the communities that you're working with. So what we did was we started to looking at, back in the mid-1900s, there was a lot of uranium mining out on the Colorado Plateau, which is where the Navajo Nation lies. And none of those mines were remediated, like about 132 mines. And so as a result, there's all this waste that was left behind, and the Navajos were very, very concerned about it. We have done a lot of work in water, looking at the water supplies, but every time we would talk to these communities, they'd say, well, what about our mutton? Is there uranium in our mutton? And so we finally were able to connect with some community folks to be able to actually try to answer that question. So what you're looking at this is the map of the Navajo Nation. And over here, you see all these yellow dots. Those are all abandoned mines. And so the black dots are areas that we collected or we worked with families to get sheep. The red dot, we had all the sheep came from one family, and then we had to get sheep from way off the reservation in order to do some comparison of the uranium levels, because it turns out there's not standard reference materials for uranium in sheep. Who'd have thunk it, right? So one of the other things that we did, I'm not going to talk about tonight, but was also to do some surveying of communities to find out how much sheep do they eat, how much mutton do they eat, so we could bring the chemistry information together with this survey information to really look at exposure. And the way we're doing it is actually using an indigenous health indicator that was developed by the Swinomish tribe up north from here. And they have done that for shellfish. So we have been working with them. It's been really wonderful. And so in order to collect the sample, so this is where the difficulty of sample collection comes in, we had to connect with the community. And so we went to these different sites and collected 5 animals from each site, and then essentially had an assembly line and had a traditional Navajo butchering. And so it was awesome to have students who really knew what they were doing, because Dr. Ingram, not so much. She's sort of a city girl. And so we had students, these 2 students aren't even mine. They just volunteered. They're like, I want to go, type of thing. We had some grandmas helping us. We also had, her name's Dr. Ruby. She's called a res vet, and she would come and assess the health of these animals. So the students really, really had a great time. Quite honestly, it was great team building. If you need some team building, butchering a sheep, it works well. So, and we collected all these different organs and tissues, because one of our questions is, does the uranium accumulate in some organs more than others? So we wanted to be able to give that information back to the community. So we collected all these organs and tissues. And this is just a comparison of sheep that were in Cameron, sheep that were in Loop, and this is the average of those 5 sheep. What we expected was that the Cameron would be higher than the Loop. That was our hypothesis, because there was a lot of mining in Cameron and really none in Loop. So then we were like, so is this just background and these sheep are really peeing out most of the uranium, or is there something else? So then we got this sort of off-site area of eager, and you can see, even though the air bars are kind of big, concentration of uranium per kidney is on the y-axis, and these 3 different samples. Anyway, clearly the eager is lower. So it does seem that there is an accumulation and elevation of uranium in these animals' kidneys. And so what we've been doing is looking at all the different types of organs and tissues, as well as looking at some other sites. So Andy's really pulling all that together for her dissertation. All right, so the last sort of example of using the periodic table is calcium in what's called blue corn mush. So this is a bowl of blue corn mush, and this is the student who did this work, Daniel Begay, who is now a analytical chemist with W.L. Gore in town. And so this really came about through thinking about the lack of dairy that most Navajo people eat. So many people, including myself, our Navajo folks are lactose intolerant. So folks don't eat a lot of dairy, so they don't get a lot of calcium. So that's what this is kind of saying down here. So blue corn mush is blue corn that's made into kind of like, if you're from the South, grits, maybe, right? But added to the blue corn is juniper ash. So this is a juniper tree, and the Navajo take a limb of it and then burn it, get the ash, and actually add it to the blue corn mush. It's a little bit like a baking soda type of thing. And so the reason why we wanted to do this project was inspired from this paper, where they looked at elderly Navajo women who fell and had less fractures, like in their hips and their knees, compared to the majority population. And so these folks postulated that they were getting, stronger bones from some other calcium source because they weren't eating dairy. And so they thought it could have come from this blue corn mush, because if you look at it, if you got no teeth, you can eat this stuff, right? And so in senior citizens' homes, this is served every day because it's really easy to digest, it's traditional, it's pretty inexpensive, and so that's where these folks in this paper were thinking that, that's why there was a stronger bones in these women. And so what my student did, and one of the things we were questioning was, is the calcium content in this ash the same if you get your juniper from anywhere on the reservation? And so these are, again, this is the Navajo Nation, and these are just different spots where he collected sample. He also could, we could go to the flea market and actually buy ash. And so you notice there's your state right there, Oregon incense flat cedar. All right, so he tested all of these. And what he did was he both ashed the juniper in a furnace, and then he did a traditional ashing like grandma would do in the backyard. And so he compared the calcium levels in all these different samples. So this is calcium concentration versus all these different samples that have been ashed in these two different ways. For the most part, on average, the values are pretty similar. He sees a little better from the laboratory ashing, but I'm pretty sure because he's not as good as grandma. So I think grandma probably does a better job of ashing. But anyway, the good news here was that you don't need to go to a specific part of the res to get better ashed juniper than others. So I thought that was really good, because this is at all these are from very different elevations. So I thought that was the good news. And so the bottom line is eat more juniper ash. I thought I need to end on a positive note, not the uranium. So, and again, this is the student. He's a kick in the pants, that kid. He looks so Navajo, and he is such a goofball. Not that Navajos can't be goofballs, but anyway, he was a lot of fun to have in the lab. So, so with that, I'm just going to end with pictures of my non-biological children. They call me their chemistry mom. And so these are just folks that I've worked with or students over the years. This is drying mutton in the lab. So sometimes when you walk in the lab, you're like, whoo, it smells in here, doesn't it? So, and just a lot of different students over the years. It's not just native students. But a lot of different folks who've worked in my lab and done different things, lots of field work, but also, giving presentations at different conferences. This is actually a high school student, so sometimes we had high school students working in the lab. So with that, of course, I have to acknowledge the wonderful people I work with. Dr. Jamie Donatuto and Larry Campbell are from the Swinomish tribe, and they have been helping us with this Indigenous Health Indicator. Our wonderful collaborators around the Navajo Nation. I should have added the Mother Road folks as well to this slide, but this bullet right here, the Dene Atahli Association, that's the Medicine Man Association. Super important to talk to them and make sure that we're culturally doing this work correctly. And then, of course, everyone who pays the price to do science, which is never cheap. So with that, I will leave you with tattoos from my students. These, if you ever get to the Window Rock Museum, then you can also take your picture here. And then, of course, beer is really a solution. So anyway, with that, I'll end. So any questions? Oh, yes.
And actually, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions. So, but I wanted to also give an acknowledgement to everything and everyone who could make tonight happen. And so one of them is the Camille and Henry Dreyfus Foundation. I wrote a grant for that to them for 3 years, trying to make this happen. I finally got the grant that we could bring Jani here. Yay! Perseverance, yes. Willamette University also chipped in with a lot of this to make this happen. Yay. We also have Allied Video Productions. Thank you, Brian, and everyone from Allied making this happen. We have Capital Community Television that's here, that's also making this happen. KMUZ is taking the audio and will be having that over the air as well. 88.5, 100% FM. And for tonight, we have Alyssa and Evan of the Gov Cup. Thank you for hosting us. So wonderful. So I wanted to make sure I thanked all of those. Am I forgetting anything? I mean, besides all of you wonderful humans here.
Our signers.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Vicki, Cindy, thank you so much for interpreting. Yes. And now, all of the questions.
Yes?
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure how to ask, but I'll tell you what I'm wondering about. The juniper ash, I'm wondering about like the origin of that becoming, part of the blue corn ash, and whether, was there some recognition of the properties going into that, or was it a fluke? How far back? So I'm just wondering about that. I'm wondering if that was part of the research at all.
Yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
So the question is, why would the Navajo add the ash, right, to the mush, so to speak? So I can speculate a little bit. Some of it is actually, it was kind of like adding baking soda. I guess it gave it a better texture, is my understanding. The other thing was that I know, and this is partly from just older people, that the charcoal made your stomach feel better. And so that was another reason why they added. And they actually add ash to other foods, but it's not as prevalent. The blue corn mush, it almost always has the ash in it. But I think I don't know that they said, ooh, calcium, this will be great, kind of thing. So but that's my understanding, is both it helped the consistency and then like a, sort of a belly helper type thing.
Same a question also about the ash. I was thinking in types of ceviches, they cook fish with ash, with lye.
Right.
So I'm curious if it helps cook the corn.
So that's when you said that now. So in the old days, so this is a question again about why would you add the ash, is they actually had the corn from the cob, and then you wanted to break down that outside cellulose, and so they would add lye. Okay. And so I think it was partly that adding lye. Now most folks buy the blue cornmeal already, ground. I mean, there's still people on the res that actually do it themselves, but most of the time you just go to Bash's and get your cornmeal.
And then I had another really quick question. Is it savory? Is it salty? Is it sweet?
It's actually, it's mostly savory, okay. But if you're half Bilagana like myself, I add sugar.
Okay.
So you see people doing that. But a lot of Navajos is really the salted kind of thing. But yeah. Not usually butter or anything like that, which I have, my husband's family's from North Carolina, and that what you would do with grits, right? So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So these uranium mines, has there begun any kind of remediation, cleanup, any of that sort of stuff?
So it's my understanding out of 535, 3 are being remediated. Yeah, and it's difficult on the western side. It was open pit mining, so these are really large pits, and that's the communities we've worked the most with, and there's been a lot of trying to understand it. And I know I went to a EPA meeting where trying to be a fly on the wall, and the community was like, we do not want any more studies. We want this cleaned up. So, but like originally they threw mine tailings back over the top. And it was like, no. So then they threw topsoil, but then there was no revegetation, so it just blew away.
And just to kind of follow up, you had mutton close to a mine, or one farther from the mine, and then one that was way the heck over here.
Yes.
You still had high concentrations in this group that were not near mining. Is that leaching? Is that what's the process of that?
So we didn't know exactly where those animals were grazing, and then we learned there's a lot of sheep training. So our follow-up experiment, actually, we worked with the University of New Mexico, and they collared the animals with a GPS tracker. So those animals are from more of the Four Corners area, but we actually then knew where those animals were grazing, and we've been collecting plants and water, so we have a much better understanding. So the second experiment was better than the first. So we're not sure why the loop animals had the same levels, but we don't really have the information to be able to tease that out. So, yeah.
I'm curious, do you take into consideration all of the nuclear testing sites around the area as well? Does that affect your studies?
Yeah. So the question is, do we take into account the nuclear testing sites? Because as you know, where was it? In the middle of New Mexico. My mom actually was around when this happened, when they blew up the first one. And then there's the Nevada testing site that's not too far away. We really haven't thought too much because we mostly looked at the water table. I had a colleague that was looking more at the dust and the particulate. And it was kind of interesting because near the true mine sites, they weren't seeing it. So I think the downwind thing, because it's very arid, but we haven't thought as much about that. My colleague who I acknowledged up there, Mike Ketter, has done some more of that type of work, not just here in the States, but like the Chernobyl type of thing and all that. So I probably need to talk to him more about it. So, other questions?
So I grew up in southeastern Idaho, close to INEL, and friends that work there, or parents of a friend. And I know that it sits over one of the largest aquifers in the world. And I know your studies seem to focus more on urination rather than that area, but as time's gone on, has there been much research in the effects that...
Yes.
Because cancer rates are astronomical in southeastern Idaho.
Yeah, so when I worked for the Idaho lab, I mean, we were looking at transport, and I think initially, because, you know, they stored a lot of the waste from Rocky Flats and other places there out in the desert, and sadly, I mean, there's pictures of these barrels that they just threw into these, like, ditches, and then ran them over. And so there's definitely leakage there. But then what the geologists thought would happen is it would all get stuck in the in the mineralogy and not make it to the water table. But they see plutonium in the water table, even though it's really low. So there's people that are trying to understand that. But I'm totally not surprised. Totally not surprised, because it definitely made its way down to the water table, even though it was a good, few hundred feet, pretty deep kind of thing.
But brought in from other places.
Oh yeah, no, they.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, Rocky Flats in particular, in the Colorado area. Yeah. Now there was a lot of things I learned working for the Department of Energy. So, do you have a question?
I just hope that the prisoners or the people at that prison get the info on their concoction.
Yeah, so no, seriously, we did tell, because she was a chemistry major, but she was working part-time as a guard. And so we gave that information back to her. But when she said the way that they made it, I was like, oh my gosh, this totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I was like,
Creative. but.
Yeah, no, exactly. But so, I don't know how far that went, but yeah, crazy.
I was thinking that it might be helpful for people to know all the ways that uranium is bad for you, because there are quite a few ways, and there are ways that I have learned about from you in the last couple days, and also tell people about crystal geyser.
Oh, yeah. I know, sorry. Okay, so first, we all hopefully are aware that uranium is radioactive. And so if you're in an area where it's, a large amount, you'll take a Geiger counter and it'll go off. And that energy will definitely give you cancer. And so back in the day, Navajo miners were breathing it in, and so there was very high lung cancer among the Navajo. And essentially the industry said, well, it's because they smoke. Well, it turns out Navajos don't really smoke. And so it really was clear there was a cause and effect. However, uranium is also, as we know, it's on the periodic table. It is a chemical, and it has a bit of a rich oxidation chemistry, and it can act kind of like a heavy metal, like you would think about lead and that kind of thing. So I had one of my colleagues, a toxicologist, was looking at how uranium as a chemical could break DNA and so cause DNA mutations. So it has been linked particularly to kidney disease and kidney cancer. So we just got funded to look at this connection by working with one of the hospitals out on the reservation and being able to look at medical records to say, okay, these are cancer incidences, where do these people live? And then do the environmental work to see if there's a correlation. So I'm not an epidemiologist, but I'm going to learn lots about epidemiology. And I identified a Navajo epidemiologist who's finishing her doctorate at the University of Arizona, and I think she's going to postdoc with me. So I am so excited. So crystal geyser. Okay, so drinking water standards, if you look them up, the maximum contaminant level for uranium is 30 parts per billion. So when we do our analysis, a lot of folks on Navajo don't have running water, so they use livestock water, unregulated. And so we try to give them information. This well is above that 30 part per billion level. We wouldn't drink it. We would consider not drinking it. So crystal geyser drinking water is right around that 30 part per billion level. We've tested a lot of different, bottled waters and that kind of stuff, and that one is high. And we actually use it to tune our instrument because it's so cheap and you just have a pretty good source. So my other public health recommendation is, pick a different water type. Because I think it's just because it's the source. And again, just like many things that we think are regulated, bottled water is not regulated. So just word to the wise.
Is crystal geyser from?
No, it's not. No, it's. I think it's. I don't know. It says on the bottle where the spring is, but it doesn't give
Idaho.
There you go. Or maybe that and Coors Light, right? Or Coors is maybe the same place. But yeah, it's just interesting because it's pretty consistent. So, like I said, it's pretty easy for us to use it to tweak our instrument because it's cheap. So, all right. Any other questions?
I had a question about the tattoo ink. So, those are factory made, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
How do those compare to more, like I know a lot of indigenous groups have their own traditions of tattooing all over the world. How do those compare to the more, natural?
That's it's a good point. I don't know. And I'm sure it depends on really the soil, if they're using plant pigments or where those pigments are coming from. So that's a really good question, but I don't know. The black in particular is just all over the place. So that's why if you do get a tattoo and then you decide to get it removed, it's not easy. Because what they do, they use a laser and they try to match the energy of breaking it apart to the ink, but what is it? So that's why a lot of times people have to do multiple treatments, because it's like trying to figure out which one is going to work, because it's variable throughout. Yeah. So, yeah, my only other comment, again, public health, you can take it or leave it, and I don't know why, so I don't think it's an elemental thing, but the reds tend to give people more problems. So because three of the 5 people in my family have tattoos, me not being one of them. But I'm just like, just don't get red. Just don't get red. So, and I don't know why. It might be, like I said, more of an organic thing. So I don't know. But I don't think I have any other public health announcements for the evening. So.
Since doing that study, have there been more attempts, or at least like pushes for regulation of testing?
There is not. The thing that's really amazing, I looked it up for tonight. I thought, well, maybe, because it's interesting, the industry regulates permanent makeup, which is really a tattoo. Yeah, but they still are not regulating what people inject into you. So, yeah, I don't know. Take it or leave it. And they're so prevalent now, right? So it's interesting, but yeah. Any other, back there?
Yeah, I'm sorry we were late. I think
No.
that worked away after 7, but is this, since we missed the beginning of it, are your slides available for the public, or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can give them to Willamette, or yeah. They're on somewhere. There, I can give to them.
Recorded, and
Oh.
it will be on CCM Capital Community Media, and we'll be putting it on their YouTube channel,
Okay.
and they will be broadcasting it on their channels as well. So all of it will be available.
There you go. There you go. You can share with your grandma, your kids, whoever. Yes.
There's a question over here about tattoos. Oh, I was wondering if your mass specs or your instruments can determine what kind of black ink somebody has.
So I don't have the data. So when I was at the Idaho lab, we did surface chemistry using a technique called secondary ion mass spectrometry. And it actually did more of the molecular. So we sent some of that tattoo ink up to Idaho, and essentially you just put it on almost like a nail head, and then the instrument looks at it. And so we couldn't identify all the peaks, but we could look at patterns. And so we were sort of comparing patterns and pulling out some stuff. But quite honestly, I didn't really have any grant money to do this, so we were doing this on a shoestring. But that would be a really interesting thing.
I couldn't really give you a sample of my skin, so how can you do it on a person? Like,
Not with secondary. We could scrape some off, probably. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. You know what could work? Maybe it depends on the concentration, but is the X-ray fluorescence. That this student of mine who is in one of these pictures, I'm very proud of him. Where is he? So, dang, I'm not seeing. Oh, this one in the middle with the cows. He got his doctorate with me. His name is Dr. Tommy Rock now. He works at Princeton because he's amazing. He's postdocing there now. But anyway, he has an instrument, and you can buy these instruments. And so they're really to go out in the field and do elemental screening kinds of things. But I bet that might work on a tattoo.
So then you would know how to best attack it to...
Yeah, you could at least tell the tattoo remover person, this is what I find. Yeah, it would probably help. So, but I don't know. Maybe that's a good retirement proposition, whatever. So, yeah. All right, any other questions? Yes?
This is very interesting. First of all, thank you for your presentation. As I've been watching you talk, some of the things that you've said have really struck me. And
the information about the juniper ash. Some people complain about those types of practices because of the water that it takes. and that sort of thing. But I found that was very interesting. I go to Arizona from time to time. I used to be a member of the Deaf Intertribal Council as a Native American myself, and so the different tribes that you have. Are you only working with the Navajo tribe, or have you made contact with, say, the Apache tribe or other tribes that are in that area? And I wonder if they're experiencing the same issues, or do they have different issues that they experience?
So that's a very good question. So there's 22 federally recognized tribes in the state of Arizona alone. And we have worked with, off and on, with the Hopi tribe. The Hopi tribal lands are right in the midst of the Navajo lands. Very different group of people. They're Pueblo people. So we've done more water work with them. We worked a bit with the Yavapai Apache, who are just south of Flagstaff. They have tremendous arsenic problems with their water. They had some tribal council changes, and they kind of said, we know there's arsenic, we don't want to know more. So we have backed off of that for a bit. Right now, we just started a project with the Cocopah. They're in the southwestern corner of Arizona. They border the Mexico border and then the California border. And there is where in the winter, I understand everyone gets their lettuce. So it's an agricultural area. And it's if you don't know Yuma, Arizona, it's crazy hot in the summer, but it's beautiful right now, this time of year. So there's a lot of pesticide use, so that's their concern. Besides the fact that Mexico, right on the other side, is Juarez, a city that burns their trash, and when the wind blows. So they have a lot of air issues, air quality issues. The water table is very shallow, so there's those issues. So we've been working with them on water and air. So as I get connected to others, mostly through students, we try to at least see what the concerns are for different tribes. To me, the most important thing is to start with conversations. What are things that you're concerned with? Are there things that we could help? Are there things that other people at my institution could maybe look at? And so we've sort of taken that approach. So, yeah. So it's been awesome. That and just learning about other tribes, even being here, has been really, really wonderful. So.
Awesome.
Yes?
I had a question about arsenic.
Mm-hmm.
I know you've studied arsenic. Did you
go out studying arsenic, or did that come out? Okay, could you talk more about that?
Yeah, so the tribe, it was uranium mining, so the tribe's like, we want to know about the uranium and all these things, uranium. So we have this instrument that can do pretty much the periodic table in the analysis. And so we started to look, and I know that arsenic is an issue in the western part of the United States anyway. So we would do both uranium and arsenic analyses. We also then added more of the elements, quite honestly. But it turns out that in a lot of the wells, so my group has looked at over 300 livestock wells, mostly in the western part of Navajo, and sampled them multiple times, so we feel pretty good about the numbers. There's probably twice as many of those wells that have elevated arsenic levels than uranium. So that's something that I feel like we've told the tribe. And arsenic, if you're not aware of it, it is a carcinogen. And definitely if you have underlying health issues, it just makes them worse. And so that's something, and it's not a metal. So in the environment, it's charged negatively. Most metals are charged positively, so most filter systems are set up for positive ions or positive metals, so you can't use the same approach to clean up. So it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. So, but we've been looking lately at manganese. So that one is not really regulated as a maximum contaminant level, but people have seen around the world, if you're exposed to sort of elevated levels, so not super high levels, but elevated levels over a period of time, that you have neurological issues. So we're starting to try and add that to any samples that we look at, so we can have that information for the tribe as well. So, yeah.
So this is a very micro level, study, and that's very interesting, and it's also very interdisciplinary. I'm wondering, because this is like a university setting, if there are any panels going along, like discussing this information with like other disciplines, like art and environment and stuff.
Yes.
I'm really interested.
So the question is the interdisciplinary enough approach or the look at all these problems, and are there more discussions sort of on a higher level, right? Yeah. So my university, because we are a public school, we're not a liberal arts school, but someone got the idea that you could tell the story much better through art. And so they got a grant to bring in both local and artists from around. Took them around, actually my student Tommy took them out to Cameron, they butchered a sheep, really trying to explain here are the issues. And then they had all these folks come up with projects to try and describe the issues in a lot of different media. And then they had that displayed at the Coconino Center for the Arts. So there's been some attempt to really try and, like I said, bring this story out better. The Native people, that's how they really provide information, is storytelling. So there's a lot of storytelling and digital stories and that kind of stuff. So there really is attempts to try and say, look at this issue, beyond just here's my bar charts. So it's been really fun, because there has been a lot of interaction with folks. So, and then just through different types of communication as well. So I think there's at least people are trying. So. I
had a question. You mentioned like the nuclear testing. I'm from Nevada, Las Vegas. I grew up like less than 100 miles from where they were doing all that. I've been to the overlooks where people would watch.
Yeah.
Have there been like studies or testing to see how that affects not just individuals, but like across the generations, both in Nevada and
beyond? Yes. So there's this so the question is about the Nevada test site, but really the effect of the Nevada test site, older people, present people, and so forth. So they did bring about the downwinders, so people that were sort of in where the air was flowing and all that kind of stuff. And there's been some analysis and tests of that, but it's kind of interesting because I live downwind of the Nevada test site. So Kingman is right there. We were excluded as downwinders. So I think there's some funny business with all of that. So I think and a lot of community groups have tried to get people to pay more attention. So my colleague, Mike Ketter, has actually done some sample collection and looking at areas around the Nevada test site to see really where was the fallout most. So I think he's published a few papers on that.
There's members of my family that were living, breathing, walking around, not even 100 miles, and that was actively happening. So
Sure.
It's a little closer to home.
I know. Like I said, my community, because there's been a lot of cancers in our area, and it was almost like they went around. It's like, so, yeah.
I'm asking a question for a friend. So we talked about how there was a breakdown of the sheep and the different parts of the sheep. Were there different traces of uranium in different parts of the sheep? And then was there a response from the Navajo on what they used with that?
Right. So in the survey, so this is a question about the uranium really levels in different pieces and parts of the sheep. So first of all, Navajos eat pretty much the whole thing. So if they butcher that animal, they're going to eat everything. And so that's why we decided to test as many tissues and organs as we could. And so we definitely do see differences. The good news is in a lot of the meats that people use often, like ribs and backbones and that kind of stuff, those are the lower levels. Definitely kidney, liver has elevated, as you might expect, because those are sort of filters. We also see, interestingly, in the stomach lining of the sheep, which you might say, well, who cares? Who's eating that? Well, that's what Navajos use to make what's called blood sausage, and I think it's because of the acidity of the stomach. So we're definitely seeing that, but we're trying to statistically analyze the data so we're not like half, baked saying this is what this is. But that's really, in the end, we want to have some guidelines to say, just don't eat the kidney, just stay away from this part of that part, because when Navajos eat mutton, it's like a spiritual experience. It is a spiritual experience. So, and you all probably have food in your lives that's like that too. So yeah, burger's a burger, but we in our survey saw that, you have to have it a family gathering. It is a necessary part of many of the ceremonies. And so it's got a really deep meaning. And that's why I think communities constantly ask us, is there uranium in our mutton? So, but yeah, so we're trying to parse that out type thing.
How would you safely dispose of contaminated meat like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good question. It's not really high level. It's not going to get a Geiger counter going, but
there's concerns.
Yeah. No, it's kind of interesting because our institution, NAU, we were in the procedure said we were going to buy the sheep, take the organs that we needed, but give the meat back to the families who wanted it. And NAU said no. Then if that meat's contaminated, that means you're giving them contaminated meat. And so in the end, we said, we're just going to buy the organs that we need. We're not buying the whole sheep. I mean, it was a legal thing, but it was just crazy. I was like, okay. So it took us a while to be able to work that out. So anyway, that's university politics, I think. So any other questions? These are all awesome. Y'all are great. This is fun. Better than me standing here and staring at you and be like, really? No questions? Okay. So, all right.
Are other types of alcohol as unregulated as beer?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. I mean, the wine industry, for example, because, it depends on where the soil is. So definitely sulfides are determined because a lot of people have problems with them, but like the elements,
Yeah, just about that, I don't know if it's true, but I think it might have to do with the fact that fermentation is one of the safest food preservation techniques. So I know that like fermented food, sauerkrauts, things like that, aren't under the same level of scrutiny as a lot of other kinds of preserved foods. Right.
Yeah, I think just the elemental side of it, it's there. So, but it's definitely, even in the same vineyard, perhaps, you can get variation and stuff. So it's a tricky question, for sure. So, yeah, the Mother Road brewery that we were working with, their concern partly was more the equipment they were using. So I guess a lot of times breweries will buy the cheapest stainless steel, and so whether you would get leaching of things like chromium, so that was a question. And then there's some beers are filtered, and they use what's called diatomaceous earth, and whether that was leaching out, say, arsenic from just that material. So those were some of the questions they had. So, yeah. So my student was amazing. It turns out, though, beer is not beer. So it was a lot more difficult than if he was just, I think, analyzing Miller Lite. Because it's thick, it's a lot. So, but at the same time, we had a few of those beverages while we were discussing the project. So that made it a lot more fun. And it was always good to have our meetings over at Mother Road, because first thing he'd say is, what do you want? And I'm like, ooh. So anyway.
So did he go on to get a PhD in beer studies?
So actually, the initial person that we worked with Mother Road is down the road or up the road at Oregon State, getting his PhD. He is awesome. His name is Morrison. It's Campbell Morrissey. So if you ever hear about him, he's awesome. And then my student Jason is in PhD school, but he's becoming an electrochemist, and he's going to save the world with energy. So, yeah. All right, well, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for this opportunity.